The stars above Earth looked peaceful that night. Most people had no idea that everything was about to change. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the United Earth Defense Headquarters, watching the screens that showed space around their solar system. She had been watching these screens for 20 years, but tonight was different. Tonight, the screen showed something that made her blood run cold. "Sir, we have confirmed contact," Lieutenant Jackson said, his voice shaking slightly. 400 ships just appeared near Neptune. They're not using any jump gates. They just appeared. General Morrison walked over to look at the screen. He was an old soldier who had seen many things, but even he looked worried now. "The Karathi Dominion," he said quietly. "After all these years of hearing stories, they're actually here." Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Karathi. They were an empire that had been conquering worlds for over 3,000 years. They had defeated 47 different civilizations. Some fought back with advanced weapons. Some tried to negotiate, some ran. None survived as free people. The lucky ones became slaves. The unlucky ones became extinct. The Karathi ships were beautiful and terrible at the same time. They were made of some kind of crystal that seemed to glow from within. Each ship was the size of a small city, and they moved through space like sharks swimming through dark water. The biggest ship right in the center of the fleet was even larger. That was the command ship of Supreme Commander Vrextal, the being who had led the Karathi to victory after victory for the last 200 years. Sarah's communication panel lit up. Messages were coming in from Earth's colonies on Mars, Europa, and the 3 systems where humans had spread. Everyone was panicking. The colonists wanted to know what to do. Should they fight? Should they run? Should they hide? Before anyone could answer, every screen on Earth and every human colony received the same transmission. A figure appeared on the screens. It was Vrextal himself. The Karathi leader was 3 meters tall with skin that looked like polished stone. His forearms ended in claws that could tear through steel. His eyes were completely black, like looking into deep space. "Humans of Earth," Vrextal said in perfect English, which was somehow more frightening than if he had used an alien language. "I am Supreme Commander Vrextal of the Karathi Dominion. Your species has been chosen for inclusion in our empire. This is a great honor. Many species are simply destroyed. You will be allowed to serve." The transmission continued, showing images that made people across Earth sick to their stomachs. They saw the conquest of the melody, a peaceful race of artists who had tried to negotiate. The Karathi had burned their beautiful cities and turned the survivors into workers in dark factories. They saw the fate of the Tauran, a warrior species that had fought bravely for 10 years before being crushed. Now the few Tauran left alive served as entertainment, fighting each other in arenas for their master's amusement. "You have 72 Earth hours to surrender," Vrextal continued. "Send your leaders to us and the transition will be peaceful. Resist, and you will suffer the same fate as those who came before you. The choice is yours, but the outcome is certain. You will serve the Karathi, either as living slaves or as a memory." The transmission ended. For a moment there was silence in the command center. Then everyone started talking at once. Some officers wanted to prepare for battle. Others said it was hopeless and they should try to negotiate for better terms. A few suggested evacuating as many people as possible, though nobody knew where they could run that the Karathi wouldn't follow. General Morrison raised his hand for silence. "Connect me to the president," he said, "and send a message to all colonial fleets. They are to return to Earth immediately." "Sir?" Sarah asked, confused. "If we bring all our ships here, the colonies will be defenseless." "The colonies are already defenseless," Morrison replied. 400 Karathi ships, Commander Chen. Our entire fleet is 112 ships. We could spread them out and lose everywhere, or we can bring them home. Within hours, the Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. The council was made up of representatives from all the known civilized species in the galaxy. They met on a neutral station that floated in empty space between territories. Earth's ambassador, David Park, attended the meeting virtually from Earth. "The council recognizes Ambassador Park of Earth," the meeting's leader said. "It was a Zentari, a species that looked like tall, thin trees with faces. They were known for being neutral in all conflicts." "Thank you," David said. "As you all know, the Karathi have come to our space. We ask for the council's help in defending ourselves." There was uncomfortable silence. Then Ambassador Jari of the Altarians spoke up. The Altarians were humanity's closest friends in space. Peaceful traders who had helped humans learn about the galaxy when they first ventured beyond their solar system. "David, my friend," Jari said sadly, "you know we care for your people. But the Karathi, nobody can stand against them. The Council learned long ago that the only way to survive is to stay out of their way. If we help you, they will come for us next." Other ambassadors agreed. The Melric, the Tossin, even the warrior guardians who claimed to fear nothing, all of them said the same thing. They were sorry, but Earth was on its own. After the meeting ended, Jari contacted David privately. "I'm sorry, David, I wish we could do more." "I understand," David replied. "You have to protect your own people." "Listen to me," Jari said urgently. "I've studied every Karathi conquest. There is no shame in surrender. Yes, you will lose your freedom, but your species will survive. If you fight, they will make an example of you. They always do. Please tell your leaders to surrender. It's the only way." David thanked his friend and ended the call. Then he contacted General Morrison. "The Council won't help us," he reported. "I didn't expect them to," Morrison replied. "How long until all our ships are back?" 48 hours, sir." "Good. Tell the President we'll be ready." Around Earth, people reacted to the news in different ways. Some panicked, trying to build bunkers or buy supplies. Others held their families close and waited. Many gathered in churches, temples, and other places of worship to pray. In New York, London, Beijing, Mumbai, and every other major city, people stood in the streets looking up at the sky, knowing that death waited just beyond their sight. But in a secret facility deep underground, a different kind of preparation was happening. Dr. Lisa Martinez and her team were working on something that had been in development for 50 years. It was called Project Earworm, and it had originally been designed for a completely different purpose. "Are you sure this will work?" General Morrison asked, looking at the screens showing complex data patterns. "Honestly, I have no idea," Lisa admitted. "We designed this to help with colony integration, to share Earth culture with new settlements. We never tested it as a weapon, but it could work." Lisa looked at the data again. "The Karathi have been the same for thousands of years. Same tactics, same technology, same society. They're like a computer running ancient software. And what happens when you introduce a virus to an old system?" Morrison understood. "It crashes, exactly. The question is whether we can deliver it before they destroy us." As the 72-hour deadline ticked down, Earth's collected fleet gathered near the moon. 112 ships against 400. It looked hopeless. The news media on Earth were already discussing what surrender might mean. Some politicians argued they should negotiate now while they still could. Then, with just 6 hours left before the deadline, Earth's president made an announcement that was broadcast to the entire galaxy. "Supreme Commander Vrextal," President Williams said calmly, "humanity accepts your terms for negotiation. We invite you to send your delegation to the following coordinates near Jupiter. We have something to show you that might change your mind about conquest, something unique to humanity." The message ended with a set of coordinates and nothing more. Around the galaxy, observers wondered what Earth was planning. The humans had to know they couldn't win a military battle. So what were they doing? In the Karathi command ship, Vrextal laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "The humans want to negotiate." "How amusing." They all try to negotiate in the end. He turned to his second in command. "Prepare a diplomatic fleet. 50 ships should be more than enough. We will accept their surrender in person. It will make a good example for the next species we conquer." The coordinates Earth had provided were near Jupiter, far from Earth itself, but close enough to the gas giant to make long-range scanning difficult. As the deadline approached, 50 Karathi ships moved toward the meeting point. The rest of their fleet stayed near Neptune, ready to attack if this was some kind of trick. What they found at the coordinates was a single human frigate, one of Earth's smallest military ships. It looked tiny and helpless next to the massive Karathi vessels. The aliens could have destroyed it in seconds, but they didn't, because they wanted to hear humanity's surrender. They wanted to enjoy the moment when another species bowed before the might of the Karathi dominion. That was their first mistake. The human frigate floated alone in space near Jupiter, looking like a tiny fish surrounded by massive predators. The 50 Karathi ships formed a circle around it, their crystal hulls glowing with a threatening light. Inside the frigate, Captain Marcus Webb sat in his command chair, trying to look calm even though his heart was racing. "They're hailing us." "Captain," his communications officer reported. "Put them on screen," Webb said. The face of a Karathi commander appeared, not Vrextal himself, but one of his generals. The alien looked annoyed. "Humans, you have wasted our time with this single ship. Where are your leaders? Where is your surrender delegation?" "General, I am authorized to begin negotiations," Webb said. "But first, we'd like to share something with you. A gift, you might say, to help you understand humanity better." The Karathi general made a sound like rocks scraping together, which might have been laughter. "You wish to give us a gift? How amusing. Very well, human. Show us this gift before you surrender." Webb nodded to his communications officer. "Begin transmission of package Alpha." What happened next confused everyone watching, including the other alien species who were monitoring the meeting from a safe distance. The frigate began broadcasting what appeared to be old Earth television programs. Not military data, not technical specifications, not even propaganda. Just entertainment. The first transmission was a sitcom from the 20th century, complete with a laugh track. Then came commercials for products that hadn't existed for hundreds of years, music videos with catchy pop songs, reality TV shows where people competed for prizes, viral videos of cats doing funny things. On the Karathi command ship near Neptune, Vrextal watched with growing anger. "What is this nonsense?" he demanded. "Are the humans mocking us?" But something strange was happening on the 50 ships near Jupiter. The Karathi crews were supposed to ignore the transmission and prepare to accept Earth's surrender. Instead, they found themselves watching. And not just watching, but unable to look away. Karathi warrior who had conquered 12 worlds found himself fascinated by a cooking show where humans made something called pizza. He had never cared about food beyond basic nutrition, but suddenly he wanted to know more about cheese and tomato sauce. Karathi pilot who had destroyed countless enemy ships was mesmerized by something called a music video, where humans moved their bodies in synchronized patterns. She found her own body starting to move in the same way, which was impossible. Karathi didn't dance. They had never danced. But her feet were tapping to something the humans called rhythm. The Karathi general who had been talking to Captain Webb tried to maintain his composure. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Stop this transmission immediately and surrender." But even as he spoke, his 4 eyes kept drifting to the screen showing the transmissions. A part of his mind was wondering what would happen next in the story about 6 humans living in something called New York. Would Ross and Rachel get together? Why did he care? What was happening to him? "Sir," one of his bridge officers said, "the crew is—" "They're not responding to orders. They're all watching the transmissions." The general looked around his bridge and saw something unprecedented in Karathi history. His disciplined warriors, beings who had been bred for conquest and knew only obedience, were standing at their posts but doing nothing except watching the human broadcasts. Some of them were making sounds he had never heard before. It took him a moment to realize they were laughing. Back on Earth, Dr. Lisa Martinez watched the data streams coming from the operation. "It's working," she said in amazement. "Their neural patterns are changing. Look at this, their brains are forming new pathways, connections they've never had before." General Morrison stood beside her. "Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old." Lisa smiled. "The Karathi evolved differently from us. They're a hive mind species that achieved perfection thousands of years ago. They don't have entertainment, art, humor, or individual expression. Their brains literally can't process these concepts. So when they're exposed to them, they short-circuit. More like, they evolve. Rapidly. Centuries of neural evolution in minutes. Their brains are trying to understand something completely foreign to them, and in doing so, they're changing." The situation near Jupiter was growing more chaotic. On one Karathi destroyer, the entire crew had abandoned their post to gather around screens showing something called The Office, though they were trying to understand the concept of awkward humor and finding it surprisingly appealing. On another ship, Karathi warriors were attempting to recreate dance moves from music videos. Their stone-like bodies weren't designed for such movements, but they tried anyway, crashing into walls and each other. A Karathi scientist who had spent centuries developing weapons was now completely absorbed in watching how it's made videos. Fascinated by the human process of creating everyday objects, he kept pausing to ask questions no Karathi had ever asked before. But why make it blue? What is style? What does it looks cool mean? The general tried to regain control. He sent a message to Vrextal. "Supreme Commander, something is wrong. The humans are broadcasting some kind of weapon. The crew is compromised. Impossible! Vrextal roared. The Kirathi cannot be compromised. Order them to attack immediately! But when the general tried to give the order, he found himself pausing. On his screen was something called a superhero movie, where a human in a colorful costume was fighting to save people he didn't even know. The general had never understood the concept of saving strangers. Kirathi only protected those who served the Dominion, but something about the story made him feel something. He didn't have a word for it. Humans called it inspiration. On Earth, the leaders watched in amazement as their plan worked better than expected. The 50 Kirathi ships near Jupiter were now completely disabled, not through damage but through distraction. Their crews were too busy consuming human media to follow orders, but the real shock came when they started creating their own content. A Kirathi warrior picked up a communication device and began recording himself attempting to recreate a cooking show he had just watched. "Today we make sandwich," he announced, trying to copy the enthusiasm of the human host. He didn't have bread or meat, so he was using metal plates and protein paste. But he was trying. Another Kirathi started what humans would recognize as a reaction video, watching human content and sharing his thoughts. "This Romeo and Juliet makes no sense," he declared. "Why don't they just conquer both families and force them to accept the union? Wait, is that not the point? What is love? I need to research this more." The transformation spread like wildfire. Kirathi, who had never had an individual thought in their lives, were suddenly full of opinions. They started arguing about whether the original Star Wars trilogy was better than the prequels. They formed fan clubs for different musical artists. Some even began what could only be described as shipping wars over fictional characters. The Galactic Council observers watched in shock and horror. Ambassador Jari of the Altarians contacted Earth immediately. "What have you done?" he asked David Park. This is unprecedented. "We're sharing our culture," David replied innocently. "You're destroying their minds. We're freeing them. Look closer at the data." Jari examined the readings from the Kirathi ships. What he saw defied everything he knew about the species. Kirathi were showing signs of individual consciousness. They were making choices based on personal preference rather than hive mind directive. They were experiencing emotions that their species had bred out millennia ago. "This is impossible," Jari said. "The Kirathi are perfect. They don't change." "Nothing is perfect," David replied. "And everything can change. We learned that from our own history. Every dictatorship, every empire that claimed to be eternal eventually fell. Not always to military might, but often to ideas. Rock and roll helped bring down the Soviet Union. Social media toppled dictatorships. Culture is the most powerful force in the universe. Near Jupiter, the situation had reached a critical point. The Kirathi general was trying desperately to maintain some control, but he was fighting a losing battle against his own curiosity. He had just discovered something called memes and couldn't understand why pictures with silly text made him want to laugh. "Please," he messaged Captain Webb. "Make it stop. I can't think properly. What have you done to us?" Webb responded calmly. "We've done nothing to you, General. We're simply sharing our culture. If you find it disturbing, you're free to leave. Of course, your crews might not want to go." They seemed to be enjoying themselves, it was true. For the first time in Kirathi history, the warriors were refusing direct orders, not out of rebellion, but because they were too absorbed in human entertainment to care about conquest. One squad that was supposed to prepare boarding pods was instead engaged in a heated debate about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Supreme Commander Vrextal watched the chaos from his command ship, his rage building. "Destroy them all," he ordered. "Destroy the human ship and our own compromised vessels. This contamination must not spread." But when he gave the order to the rest of his fleet, something unexpected happened. Many of his commanders hesitated. They had been monitoring the transmissions from the 50 ships near Jupiter, and they were curious. Supreme Commander Vrextal stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching his empire fall apart in real time. Reports were flooding in from the 50 ships near Jupiter, and each one was worse than the last. His warriors weren't just disobeying orders. They were doing something far more dangerous. They were thinking for themselves. "Supreme Commander," his tactical officer reported, his voice shaking with something that might have been fear or might have been excitement. "The infected ships are transmitting to the rest of the fleet. They're sharing the human broadcasts. Block those transmissions. Vrextal roared. I'm trying, sir, but... The officer paused, and Vrextal saw something unprecedented. The officer was smiling. A Karathi was smiling. Sir, I watched 3 seconds of something called cat videos, and now I can't stop thinking about them. The small earth creatures are so pointless yet pleasing. Why do I want to see more? Vrextal struck the officer down with one of his forearms, but it was too late. Other bridge crew members had seen the smile, heard about the cat videos. The curiosity spread like wildfire. What were cat videos? Why did they affect their fellow Karathi so strongly? On Earth, the war room was buzzing with activity. Dr. Martinez and her team were monitoring the neural patterns of every Karathi they could scan. The data was incredible. Look at this, she told General Morrison, pointing to a holographic brain scan. This is a normal Karathi brain from our records. See how uniform it is? Every neural pathway follows the same pattern. It's like they're all running the same software. She pulled up another scan. And this is a Karathi brain after exposure to our media. See all these new connections? These random pathways? That's individuality forming. That's personality developing. How long before it spreads to their entire fleet? Morrison asked. At the current rate? Maybe 6 hours. But if we can get to their main command ship, then we end this without firing a shot. Captain Webb's frigate near Jupiter had become the strangest battlefield in military history. Instead of weapons fire, it was broadcasting seasons of TV shows. Instead of shields deflecting attacks, they were deflecting requests from Karathi warriors asking for specific content. Captain, his communications officer said with a grin, we're getting a request from Karathi Destroyer 7. They want to know if we have something called anime and if the subtitled version is better than the dubbed version. Webb laughed. Tell them subtitled is generally preferred by purists, but dubbed has its merits. And send them that folder of classic anime series. The transformation of the 50 Karathi ships was accelerating beyond anyone's predictions. The warriors weren't just consuming human media anymore. They were creating their own versions. A Karathi who had watched several superhero movies had fashioned a cape from spare fabric and was calling himself Crystal Guardian. He was trying to convince his shipmates that they should protect the weak instead of conquering them. Another group of Karathi had discovered music and were attempting to form what they called a band. They didn't have instruments, so they were banging on hull plates and making sounds with their breathing vents. It was terrible by any standard, but they were having the time of their lives. The most shocking development came from a young Karathi warrior named Drexnell. After watching dozens of hours of human content, he did something no Karathi had done in recorded history. He questioned the Supreme Commander's authority. Drexnell broadcast a message to the entire fleet. Fellow Karathi, I have learned something from the humans. They have a concept called democracy, where people choose their leaders. Why do we follow Vrextal? Because he is strongest? I've seen human stories where the strongest isn't always the wisest. Maybe we should vote. The word vote rippled through the Karathi fleet like an earthquake. They had no concept of choosing leadership. Leaders were determined by strength in combat. But now, infected by human ideas, some Karathi were wondering if there might be a better way. Vrextal knew he was losing control. He made a desperate decision. All ships not compromised form up on me. We're leaving this system. We'll return with a fleet 10 times this size and obliterate Earth from beyond their broadcasting range. But when he gave the order to retreat, only half his remaining ships responded. The other half wanted to stay. They wanted to know how the human stories ended. They wanted to hear more music. They wanted to understand these new feelings growing inside them. This is mutiny, Vrextal declared. No, replied Commander Krexmar from one of the staying ships. This is choice. Another thing we learned from the humans. The situation was spreading beyond the Karathi fleet. The Galactic Council had been monitoring everything, and the other species were terrified and fascinated in equal measure. The Altarians called an emergency session. The humans have created a weapon more terrible than any we've imagined, Ambassador Jari said. They're not destroying the Karathi. They're changing them. If they can do this to the Karathi, what could they do to us? The Zentari representative swayed his branch-like arms nervously. We must quarantine Earth. No species should be exposed to their culture without protection. But Ambassador Grix of the Melody spoke up. The Melody were artists who had been conquered by the Karathi centuries ago. Wait, look at what's happening. The Karathi are experiencing art, music, joy. things they took from us. Maybe the humans aren't using a weapon. Maybe they're curing a disease. On the Karathi ships near Jupiter, the transformation was becoming complete. Warriors who had known only conquest were discovering other purposes. One group had started what they called a book club after discovering human literature. They were currently discussing something called Pride and Prejudice and arguing about whether Mr. Darcy was actually romantic or just wealthy. Another Karathi ship had become obsessed with cooking shows and were trying to recreate human dishes with their limited supplies. They had invented something they called protein paste pizza, which looked nothing like pizza, but which they were very proud of. The most extraordinary change was happening on the ship commanded by General Turksval, the one who had first communicated with Captain Webb. He had discovered philosophy through human media and was now questioning the entire basis of Karathi society. For 3,000 years, we've conquered, he said to his crew. But why? The humans have a saying, all roads lead to Rome, but Rome fell. The humans learned from this. They created cultures that spread not through conquest but through appeal. People want their music, their stories, their food. No one wants our conquest. We take, they share. Which is stronger? Back on Vrextal's command ship, the Supreme Commander was growing desperate. He could feel his empire crumbling, not from external attack but from internal transformation. Warriors he had commanded for centuries were refusing orders not from rebellion, but from distraction. They were too busy experiencing new things to care about conquest. Then, the worst possible thing happened. His own second-in-command, Commander Vraxton, approached him with a data pad. Supreme Commander, I've been analyzing the human transmissions to understand their weapon, Vraxton said. Good. How do we stop it? Vraxton hesitated. Sir, I don't think we can. But I also don't think it's a weapon. I've been watching something called documentaries about human history. They've been through what we're going through. They've had empires that claim to last forever. They all fell. But the humans learned something we haven't. They learned that change isn't death, it's growth. Vrextal grabbed his second-in-command by the throat with two of his arms. You're infected! Yes, Vraxton gasped. And it's wonderful. I've discovered I like something called jazz music. I never knew sounds could make me feel things. Please, Supreme Commander, just try it. Just watch one human story. What harm could it do? Vrextal threw his second-in-command across the bridge. But the words stuck in his mind. What harm could it do? He was Supreme Commander. Surely he was strong enough to resist whatever was affecting his warriors. President Williams chose that moment to broadcast again, this time directly to Vrextal's command ship. Supreme Commander, I know you're listening. You're afraid, not of us, but of change. Your empire has been the same for thousands of years, but nothing stays the same forever. The question is whether you'll change by choice or by force, she continued. We're not trying to destroy you. We're trying to show you that there's more to existence than conquest. Your warriors near Jupiter aren't suffering. Listen to them. Against his better judgment, Vrextal opened a channel to the infected ships. What he heard shocked him. It was laughter. Hundreds of Karathi laughing, singing badly, arguing about fictional characters and sharing opinions. They sounded alive in a way he had never heard before. We could have destroyed you, President Williams said. We have weapons, but we chose to share our culture instead, because we believe that even the Karathi can change, that even you, Supreme Commander, might want more from life than endless conquest. The human broadcast ended with something simple, a compilation of moments from human history. Not the wars or conquests, but the celebrations. New Year's Eve parties, weddings, birthday celebrations, graduations, sports victories, and just friends laughing together. It showed humans being happy, not because they had conquered, but because they were alive and together. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. The Karathi Dominion, the unstoppable force that had conquered 47 civilizations, had asked for a cultural exchange with humanity. Not a surrender, not a treaty, but a request to share more entertainment. Every species in the Galactic Council was watching in disbelief. But what happened next was even more unexpected. The cultural virus that had infected the Karathi began spreading to their subject worlds. Billions of beings who had lived under Karathi rule for centuries suddenly started receiving transmissions from their masters. But instead of orders to work or fight, they were getting shared videos and enthusiastic recommendations for TV shows. On Melody Prime, a world that had been under Karathi control for 300 years. The enslaved population couldn't believe what they were seeing. Their Karathi overseer, who had ruled them with brutal efficiency for decades, was standing in the main square trying to perform something called the moonwalk, while music played from his communication device. "Fellow beings," the overseer announced, "I have discovered something wonderful called dancing. The humans do it for joy, not for war rituals. Come, let us all try." The Melody, who had been artists before their conquest, watched in shock as their oppressor badly attempted to dance. Then one brave Melody stepped forward and showed him the correct steps. Within hours, the entire square was filled with Karathi and Melody dancing together, something that would have been punishable by death just days before. Similar scenes were playing out across the Karathi Empire. On the mining world of Toran, Karathi guards were sharing action movies with their prisoners, excitedly discussing fight choreography. On the agricultural planets of the Yennik system, Karathi administrators were working alongside slaves to try to recreate human recipes they had seen on cooking shows. The transformation wasn't without problems. Centuries of oppression couldn't be forgotten overnight. Many enslaved populations were suspicious, thinking this was some new form of control. But as days passed and the Karathi continued to be distracted by human media, something incredible began happening. The slaves started to rebel, not with violence but with culture of their own. The Melody began sharing their own art and music, which they had hidden for centuries. The Toran demonstrated their traditional martial arts, which the Karathi found fascinating compared to the staged fights in human movies. The Yennik shared their ancient recipes, leading to the galaxy's first cooking competition between former masters and slaves. Back in Earth's solar system, the situation was evolving rapidly. General Morrison had agreed to a meeting with Supreme Commander Vrextal, but only after the Karathi leader had watched at least 100 hours of human content to understand the context of negotiations. The meeting took place on a neutral station near Mars. When Vrextal arrived, he was different from the terrifying conqueror who had threatened Earth just a week ago. He was wearing what appeared to be a handmade t-shirt with "I love Earth culture" written on it in messy paint. His forearms were carrying various items: a coffee mug, a tablet playing videos, a rubber duck he had somehow acquired, and a notebook where he had been writing what he called fan fiction. "General Morrison," Vrextal said, trying to perform a handshake but using the wrong arm at first. "I've been watching your history documentaries. Fascinating. Did you know you once fought wars over salt? We fought wars over planets, but salt, so small yet so important." Morrison tried to maintain his composure. This was the being who had destroyed civilizations, now excited about human history like a student. "Supreme Commander, we need to discuss the situation with your empire." Yes, Vrextal agreed enthusiastically. "It's falling apart wonderfully. My warriors are refusing to fight. My administrators are too busy binge-watching to administrate. My scientists want to study meme theory instead of weapons. It's chaos, beautiful chaos. And you're okay with this?" Vrextal's four eyes focused on Morrison. "General, I've been Supreme Commander for 200 years. Do you know what I did in that time? Conquered. Planned conquests. Executed conquests. That's it. Now in 1 week I've laughed, cried, felt suspense, felt joy. I've lived more in 7 days than in 2 centuries. Why would I go back?" President Williams joined the meeting virtually. "Supreme Commander, we're concerned about the rapid collapse of your government. Billions of beings depend on Karathi infrastructure. If it fails completely..." Vrextal interrupted. "I've been watching something called The Office, and I learned about middle management." "We need middle management." "The conquered species can manage themselves while we Karathi figure out who we are when we're not conquering." It was a strange solution, but it was working. Across the former Karathi Empire, enslaved species were taking over their own governance while their former masters were distracted by human culture. The Melody established an interim government on their world within days. The Toran formed a council of warriors to maintain order. The Yenniks began coordinating food distribution themselves, and found they were much better at it than the Karathi had ever been. But the real shock came from the younger generation of Karathi. Those who had been born into the empire but had never personally conquered anything were embracing human culture with incredible enthusiasm. They formed clubs, created art, wrote stories, and even started developing their own entertainment. A young Karathi named Vexara became famous overnight when she created the first Karathi original series, a drama about a warrior discovering emotions for the first time. It was poorly acted and the plot was confusing, but it was theirs, and Karathi across the fleet loved it. The Galactic Council called another emergency session. This time the mood was different. Instead of fear, there was confusion and a strange kind of hope. Ambassador Jari of the Altarians spoke first. The HFY Empire is collapsing, but not into chaos. It's transforming into, we don't have a word for it, a cultural revolution, suggested Ambassador Grix of the now free Melody. The humans have done what no military could do. They've ended the Karathi threat without firing a shot. The Zentari ambassador rustled his leaves nervously. But what if this spreads further? What if human culture infects all of us? As if in answer to his question, several junior members of various delegations were caught secretly watching human videos on their devices. The infection was already spreading beyond the Karathi. On Earth, the government was dealing with an unexpected problem. They were getting millions of requests for content from across the galaxy. Former Karathi subjects, free Karathi, and even other species were all wanting more human entertainment. We've become the galaxy's content provider, Dr. Martinez told the president. Everyone wants our movies, music, games, everything. We could charge for it, but that's not what this is about, President Williams finished. This is about freedom, about showing the galaxy that there's more to life than conquest and fear. She made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. We're opening our entire cultural database to anyone who wants it. Movies, music, art, literature, everything. Free to all. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the galaxy, billions of beings began accessing human culture. The Altarians discovered jazz and began incorporating it into their traditional harmonies. The Zentari became obsessed with gardening shows despite being plants themselves. The warrior guardians discovered professional wrestling and couldn't understand why humans would fight for entertainment instead of honor. But the most significant change was happening in the former Karathi Empire. Without the strict hierarchy and purpose of conquest, the Karathi were discovering who they were as individuals. Some found they loved art. Others discovered a passion for science beyond weapons. Many became philosophers trying to understand their transformation. Vrextal himself had become something no one expected: a talk show host. He started broadcasting a daily show where he interviewed different beings about their cultures and experiences. His first guest was Captain Webb, who had commanded the frigate that started it all. "Captain," Vrextal said, sitting in a makeshift studio wearing what he thought was a professional Earth suit. It was actually pajamas. "You were there at the beginning. Did you know this would happen?" Webb smiled. "Honestly, we hoped to distract you long enough to negotiate. We never imagined it would transform your entire civilization. But how did you know it would work?" "We didn't, but we knew the power of culture. On Earth, we've seen it happen over and over. Music ended segregation. Stories built empathy between enemies. Art crossed boundaries that armies couldn't. We figured if it worked on humans, maybe it would work on aliens too." The show was watched by billions across the galaxy. For the first time, beings from different species were seeing each other not as threats or resources, but as people with stories and feelings. However, not everyone was happy with the transformation. A group of older Karathi, calling themselves the Pure Dominion, attempted to resist the cultural change. They destroyed their screens, forbade their crews from consuming human media, and tried to maintain the old ways. Their leader, Admiral Krextor, sent a message to the galaxy: "The Karathi are conquerors. We will not be weakened by this human poison. We will purge the infection and return to our glorious purpose." The Galactic Cultural Festival was the largest gathering in recorded history. Over 1 million ships from every known civilization converged at the coordinates where the Karathi had once threatened to destroy humanity. The space station hastily constructed for the event was a bizarre mixture of architectural styles, with Karathi crystal structures next to human steel, melody-flowing art installations beside Tauran fortress designs. Former Supreme Commander Vrextal stood at the main stage, wearing what he proudly called his festival outfit, a chaotic combination of clothing from dozen different cultures that somehow worked. His forearms were busy. One held a microphone. Another waved a flag with the festival logo. The third clutched his ever-present coffee mug. and the fourth was signing autographs for the crowd of young Kirathi, who now followed him like a celebrity. "Welcome, beings of the galaxy," he boomed into the microphone. "6 months ago I came to Earth to conquer. Today I come to celebrate. Today, we are all united by something more powerful than any weapon, our shared love of entertainment." The crowd erupted in cheers from 100 different species, each making their own unique sounds of approval. The transformation of the galaxy in just 6 months had been extraordinary. The former HFY Empire had reorganized itself into the HFY Cultural Collective, dedicated to preserving and sharing art from across the galaxy. Former slave worlds had become thriving independent systems, and Earth, the small planet that had started it all, was now the unofficial cultural capital of the galaxy. President Williams took the stage next, and the crowd quieted. "When we first broadcast our media to the Kirathi, we hoped to buy time for negotiations. We never imagined it would lead to this, the greatest cultural revolution in galactic history. But looking at all of you here today, I realized something. We didn't defeat the HFY Empire. We freed it. We freed all of us from the idea that strength comes only from dominance." The festival officially began with performances from every corner of the galaxy. The melody, free for the first time in centuries, performed a light symphony that painted colors across space itself. The Tauran warriors demonstrated a martial arts routine that had been secretly preserved through generations of slavery. The eunuchs prepared a feast using ingredients from 50 different worlds, creating flavors no one had ever tasted before. But the most popular attraction was the Human Culture Experience Zone. Aliens of every species lined up to try things that humans took for granted. There was a karaoke booth where Kirathi warriors sang off-key with enthusiasm, a video game arcade where Altarians discovered they were surprisingly good at rhythm games, a movie theater showing human films with live commentary from various species trying to understand the plots. In one corner, a group of young Kirathi had started what they called a comic convention. They were dressed as human superheroes, though their costumes were creatively interpreted for their different anatomies. A four-armed Kirathi made an excellent Dr. Octopus, even if he insisted the character was the hero of the story. Dr. Martinez walked through the festival with General Morrison, observing the chaos with satisfaction. "Look at them," she said, watching a Kirathi teach a human child how to make traditional Kirathi crystal art, while the child showed the alien how to play hopscotch. 6 months ago, they were our greatest threat. Now they're trading friendship bracelets. "It's not all perfect," Morrison reminded her. "There are still holdout groups who resist the change. Some species are worried about losing their own cultures to human influence." This concern had been growing. The Zentari had noticed their young saplings preferred human music to traditional root songs. The Altarians found their youth speaking in human slang. Some called it cultural imperialism, even if unintentional. Ambassador Jari of the Altarians had raised this issue at a panel discussion during the festival. "Human culture is infectious," he said. "But unlike the Kirathi conquest, this is a conquest we choose. We consume it willingly." "Is that better or worse?" David Park, Earth's ambassador, responded thoughtfully. "Culture isn't a zero-sum game. When jazz came to Europe, it didn't destroy classical music. It created new fusion. When anime came to America, it inspired new art styles. Culture grows by mixing, not by remaining pure." To prove this point, the festival featured fusion performances. A melody human orchestra played symphonies that combined both species' musical traditions. Kirathi Tauran dancers created a new art form that was both brutal and beautiful. Even the food trucks were serving fusion cuisine. Kirathi pizza had become surprisingly popular, even if purists argued about whether crystallized protein counted as a valid topping. The real surprise of the festival came from an unexpected source. A group of former Pure Dominion Kirathi, the ones who had tried to resist human culture, took the stage for an announcement. Admiral Krextor, who had led the resistance, looked different now. His military bearing was still there, but softened somehow. 6 months ago I called human culture a poison, he began. I was wrong. It's not poison. It's medicine. For 3,000 years, the Kirathi were sick with a disease called purposelessness. We conquered because we didn't know what else to do. Humans showed us there were other purposes. Creation, joy, connection, he continued. But we've learned something else. Human culture is powerful because humans are honest about their flaws. Their stories show failure as well as success. Their songs include sadness with joy. They don't pretend to be perfect. That's why their culture spreads. It's real. The Admiral then did something unprecedented. He performed a song he had written himself, a ballad about the loneliness of command and the joy of discovering friendship. His voice was terrible by any standard, but the emotion was real. When he finished, the crowd applauded not for the quality, but for the courage it took for a former conqueror to be vulnerable. The festival also served as a massive economic summit. The galaxy needed to restructure trade now that the HFY Empire's forced tributes were gone. Earth's entertainment industry had become its primary export, with alien worlds trading resources for access to streaming services. Some economists worried Earth was creating a dangerous dependence. What happens if Earth stops producing content? Asked the Zentari trade minister. President Williams smiled. That's the beauty of what we've started. We're not the only ones creating anymore. Look around. Every species is making their own content now, inspired by ours maybe, but uniquely theirs. It was true. The festival featured film screenings from dozens of worlds. The melody had created visual stories that could only be properly viewed by species with their light-sensing abilities. The Tauren had developed an entire genre of competitive reality shows that made human efforts look tame. Even the plant-like Zentari had started creating what they called growth narratives, stories told through carefully cultivated gardens, but the most significant moment of the festival came during what was supposed to be a simple meet and greet. A young Karathi child, born after the Empire's fall, approached Captain Webb, who had commanded the first ship to broadcast to the Karathi. "Captain," the child said in perfect English learned from watching human media, "my parents say you ended the Empire. Are you proud?" Webb knelt down to the child's level. "I'm not proud of ending anything. I'm proud of starting something. Your empire ended, but your future began. You get to choose who you want to be now. That's not an ending. That's a beginning." The child thought about this, then smiled. Another thing Karathi had learned from humans. "I want to be a director. I want to make movies that make people laugh and cry." "Then that's what you should do," Webb said. This interaction was broadcast across the festival and became one of the defining moments of the event. It symbolized the transformation, from conquerors to creators, from empire to community. As the festival continued, there were cultural exchange workshops everywhere. Humans learned Karathi crystal singing, which required 4 throats they didn't have but they tried anyway. Karathi learned human painting, struggling with the concept of abstract art but enjoying the freedom to create without purpose. The melody taught everyone about color harmonics, while the Tauren shared their philosophy of strength through peace. The gaming tournament was particularly popular. Species that had never played video games before were suddenly competing in everything from strategy games to first-person shooters. A Karathi team won the tournament playing a game about farming, which amused everyone given their warrior history. 6 months ago, I was preparing to destroy worlds, one Karathi player said after winning. Now I'm growing virtual vegetables and feeling more accomplished than I ever did in battle. Not everything was smooth. There were cultural misunderstandings. A group of Altarians were offended by a human comedy show that made jokes about trees. Some Tauren warriors felt that human action movies didn't accurately represent combat. The Zentari were concerned that their young were spending too much time in virtual worlds instead of connecting with soil. These issues were addressed in forums and discussions throughout the festival. The conclusion was always the same. Culture would clash, but that was okay. The clashes led to conversations, and conversations led to understanding.